Hi everyone, my name is Kiris. Today's astrology is for the autumnal fall equinox, the solar ingress into the sign of Libra that we have coming up this September 22nd. Now, it's an ancient tradition in astrology that goes all the way back to the ancient Chaldeans, Sumerians, and Babylon to cast a chart for the city, the country you live in, and to see how there will be peace, maybe there will be war, what's coming up for where you live. And again, this is ancient in astrology. I'm casting the chart today for Washington, D.C. And before I show you the solar ingress into Libra, the first thing that you cast is the solar ingress for the spring equinox. Now, when the sun goes into the sign of Aries, the sun exalts the sign of Aries. And when you cast this chart for the beginning moment of the solar year, this chart is going to show you how the year will go. And then, of course, I'm going to show you the solar ingress for the fall, the autumnal equinox. Now, this chart here that I'm showing you is for March 20th, 2022. I cast it for Washington, D.C. And when you look at the chart, first of all, this is whole sign houses. This is a daytime chart. The sun is exalted above the horizon. But we go to the first house. The chart, if you don't know a lot about astrology, the chart is a circle. Life, death, and eternity. And the 12 sections called houses, they look like pie slices, numbered 1 through 12. Each one of those houses corresponds to a different department of life. Now, the pie section numbered 1, the first house. What that represents is the physical body, or the body of a plane, a train, a ship. The first house is the health and vitality of whatever it is that we're looking at. How well structured, how well made or not is the body, the first house. Now, the first house, depending on how well fortified or debilitated, meaning how strong or not it is, this is going to show how effectively the journey will get to its destination, the highest potential, the summit, the peak of the chart, which is at the top of the chart. So whenever you cast a chart, let's say you're going on a trip, let's say you travel a lot, you fly a lot, the first house is the plane. And you want to see, again, how strong or weak it is. Now, when we look at the solar ingress, the spring equinox, the sun's entry into our new year, the first house in this chart for 2022, which shows the scope of the year, how the year is going to go. And this again is Washington, D.C. This chart has Gemini rising, and Mercury, of course, rules over Gemini. Now, in this chart, the chart ruler, Mercury, is up in the 10th house of the government. And Mercury is in its fall. It's in the sign of Pisces. Mercury is at home in its domicile and exalted in Virgo. The opposite, of course, from the exaltation is the fall. Also, Mercury is at home in Virgo, so the opposite, its detriment, would be Pisces. So if you use the word detriment instead of fall for Mercury and Pisces, I guess that's okay. I say fall. I'm not going to ticky-tack about that too much. Although in astrology and in charts, I ticky-tack about everything. Anyway, the chart ruler is debilitated. It's in its fall. It's Mercury in Pisces, and it's up in the house of the government. So when we look at Mercury in Pisces, what we're seeing is a debilitation in the area of how the government is going to communicate and how effectively it will reach its goal. Remember, the first house is the body of the ship, and its ruler is in its fall. It's Mercury in Pisces. And a lot of this, of course, is the contribution because of communication. Pisces can be illusion, delusion, lies, deceit, just not getting clear communication, period. Also, Mercury rules over travel. So we're seeing here the scope of the year, again, is a lot of miscommunication, to say the least. And will the body of the ship, will the body of Washington, D.C. get to where it wants to go with the first house ruler not in a strong placement by dignity, to say the least? So I just wanted to point that out to begin with, because if you cast charts for the solstices, the equinoxes, meaning what's going to happen over the next 3 months, then you may want to begin with the beginning of the astrological wheel by casting the chart and seeing what's in there with the solar ingress at the beginning of the solar year, sun's entry into the sign of Aries. So right there, we're seeing a problem, obviously having to do with words, communication, messages, not clear communication. So now let's go to our fall ingress, the fall equinox with the sun moving into Libra on the 22nd. This, of course, is also cast for Washington, D.C. And in this chart, we have a kite configuration. We have a yod, the finger of God, which we'll get to. This is whole sign houses. This is a nighttime chart with the sun in the 6th house of slings and arrows and illness. The 6th house is not the house of health. It's the house of ill health. Now, in a nighttime chart, Mars is happier than Saturn, although there can be modifying factors, which in this chart, Saturn is at home in Aquarius. It's retrograde, but it is in its domicile, in its castle. So that gives it a little bit of something for this chart. So we go to the first house again. And the first house in this chart is Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. Venus is in her fall. She's in the sign of Virgo. Venus's exaltation is Venus in Pisces. This chart ruler is in its fall, and Venus in this chart ties into what's called a kite configuration, but she doesn't have any dignity. So when we look at the kite, typically a kite at its best will be an opposition, trines, sextiles, and what launches the kite or gives the kite configuration its liftoff would be the planet at the bottom, which in this case, it's Venus, the chart ruler, but it's in its fall. It doesn't have any power for liftoff. This is what's ruling the chart, meaning trying to get something positive going, trying to get something started. Now, this ingress over the next 3 months, because it's a 3-month period, when you pull up the chart for the solstices, the equinoxes, this is the autumnal equinox, we're looking at from the sun's entry into Libra until the winter solstice. Now, what's going to happen in that time period? Midterm elections, which will be quite something. That's another video, and that's a whole other astrological conversation. So this chart ruler wants to get something elevated, wants to fly, we could say, to lift up that kite configuration. But what's pulling back the bow, so to speak, she's in her fall. Now, we're looking at Venus here, which is all about harmony, relationships, peace. Venus at her best, Venus in Taurus, Venus in Libra, Venus exalted. These are cosmic energies that have to do with everyone trying at least to bring peace and harmony and get along. That's what Venus is. Venus wants the peace and for everybody to be happy and harmonious. That's not happening in this chart. Now, in astrology, there is something called judicial astrology, which means to judge the chart impartially, as clearly as an astrologer possibly can. This chart and these charts we're looking at doesn't have anything to do with my personal bias politically or whatever it may be. That is not the job of the astrologer. That is not the job of the astrologer, to discern and judge the chart by just looking at what is in the chart. I love an interview years ago with the king, Elvis, and he got asked about politics, and Elvis said, "No, I'm an entertainer. I'm not going there. That's not my place." I love that little clip that you can see on YouTube, because with astrology, what I personally think or don't think or believe has nothing to do with this chart. This chart is for what's going on in Washington, and the United States chart, if you're an American, it's all of our charts. So Venus is in her fall. That is the chart, and there isn't dignity or power to make the kite lift up. Now, also there's what's called a yod. Some people call it a yod, which is known as the finger of God. What it is, two planets making a sextile, and they point to a planet where both of those planets make what's called an inconjunct. So to point to the finger of God, so to speak, in a yod configuration, we have a sextile here between Neptune retrograde in Pisces and Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. And they are both making what's called an inconjunct aspect to the moon in Leo. Now, in ancient astrology, astrology was based on the moon, not the sun for the most part. Because what do we see during the daylight? We see the planets and stars and all of that in the night. So the lunar component, which is where this yod is pointing to, it's pointing to the moon in Leo. Now, the moon, which is what's happening behind the scenes in the sign of Leo, is showing us in the chart that courage, loyalty, what is Leo? It's fixed fire. It's loyal. It's the heart, the essential center of our capacity to create, to love, to keep going. Once someone loses heart or has a broken heart, the will, which is also Leo is the heart and the spine, the will to keep going diminishes. So the yod in this chart is saying, go to the moon in Leo, go to the courage, the loyalty, the heart, the strength, the spine, keep going. Even though other factors going on in this chart are debilitated, There are so many planets in retrograde motion, which can slow things down. It does slow things down. What are retrogrades good for? If you need to do research, if you do investigative things, if you want more information, if you need to take a second and third and beyond look at something, retrogrades can be positive. Now, when the sun falls into Libra, the sun in Libra is in its fall, meaning the sun at its greatest strength and power and dignity is when the sun is in Leo. We're in the height of summer, all of the light and the power and the heat. And then as the sun moves to the sign of Libra at the autumnal equinox, the sun has entered its fall, meaning obviously we're now entering the fall season. But the strength is lessening of the sun, less light. It's starting to get cold. We're approaching that winter moment at the winter solstice. Now, the sun in its fall has a cazimi conjunction with Mercury retrograde in Libra. And Libra is ruled by Venus. Venus is in her fall. Now, cazimi, when a planet goes cazimi and goes to the heart of the sun lights up the planet that has gone cazimi, which comes from the Arabic, in the heart of. So the sun is lighting up, so to speak, the debilitation of Mercury retrograde in Libra. Libra again, Venus, things having to do with harmony and peace, and this war of words. Where is it going to get us? If we don't stop with the war of words, not very far, because we also have, which I'm sure you've heard about, this long several month cycle of Mars in Gemini. When we had Mars in Aries a few years back over the summer, at least here in the City of Angels, the heat, the horrific fires, for a couple of days, the sun literally turned bright red, and the atmosphere, the heat was so thick, you couldn't breathe. There was no atmosphere, no air to breathe. That was the long cycle of Mars in Aries. Now we have this long cycle of Mars in Gemini, which is the Mars return in the United States chart. We have Mars in Gemini in the USA's astrology chart. So Mars is the lesser malefic. Mars is about cutting things away. It's the male energy. It gets things done. It's aggressive. It's outgoing. And when it is in the sign of Gemini, which waffles, Gemini is a sign of duality, very restless and always looking for something more, never satisfied, what I call a not enougher. So this war of words tying into the Mercury retrograde in Libra, Libra being ruled by Virgo. Virgo is Mercury ruled. What all of that means is that as we look at the next 3 months, this solar ingress chart until we get to the winter solstice, and this is for Washington, D.C., the miscommunication, the one hand not knowing what the other one is doing, this war of words, and in your own personal life and in your own personal astrology chart, what will help you out is to know that as Mars waffles in Gemini, it's changing, it's morphing, it's shifting. If you personally feel that you are being held, forced, I almost want to say bullied, into making a final decision, into signing a contract that you're not ready to sign. Don't, because with the Mars and Gemini, it's just going to change anyway. Mars in Gemini is great for keeping an open mind, getting the information, getting the knowledge. Again, Gemini ruled by Mercury. But if something is happening where it's not the right time, or you're feeling pushed into making a big final decision, not with Mars and Gemini. Mars and Gemini is, it's not going to stick. It's going to change again. Everything's shifting and moving and changing. So be aware of that. This is why astrology highlights, puts a spotlight on things of life for us, so that we can be more aware of what's happening. Now, we are also getting the final Saturn square Uranus aspect. So we've had several of these building up to this last one. Saturn retrograde in Aquarius with the square of Uranus retrograde in Taurus. When Saturn and Uranus clash in a square, this is a biggie, because it's the structures, the unexpected, the shock, the surprise, tying into structures, foundations, traditions, Saturn with Uranus retrograde in Taurus, which is the money sign, things of value, things of the earth. This kind of aspect has to do with earthquakes and the earth rumbling. It also has to do with structures that have been built up financially. Rattling and rolling. That's a tough one right there. The Saturn square Uranus, both retrograde. Now, the ruler of the 10th house is Saturn. It's up in the 10th of the government, and it's retrograde with that clash, that square with Uranus. The Saturn retrograde in Aquarius gets a little bit of support. It has a trine, an air trine flow from Mars in Gemini. That's a little support. But just to see Saturn in the 10th house, Saturn in the 10th house can be a lot of frustration or feeling blocked in the area of career and achieving goals. Now we're looking at Saturn retrograde in the 10th house of the government. So there is dignity there. Saturn's in Aquarius, but retrograde, tying into that square from Uranus retrograde in Taurus, which has about an 84-year cycle. We've not had Uranus in Taurus since the Great Depression years that were leading up to World War II. So this is basically spotlighting for us, or mirroring back to us. We have to make some changes here. Economically, the way the government is structured. Again, remember that the first house is the body of whatever it is we're looking at, the health and vitality of whatever it is you're looking at in your charts. People, ships, governments, whatever it may be, it all has a first house. And this first house is suffocating to revitalize, to renew, to come back. And of course, we're in the Pluto return of the United States chart. Pluto takes about 248 years to go through all of the signs of the zodiac. So as Pluto is in its return, and Pluto in Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, the Lord of Karma. Now, with the law of karma, the country is getting its karma for good or bad, positive or negative, based on what we set into motion at the time of the birth of the United States chart. The Pluto is returning there in Capricorn. And when it comes to Capricorn and Saturn, Saturn is about responsibility. The way every single American person, or wherever you may be, the way you take responsibility. For someone to know how much power they actually have and to take responsibility for that power. This is a lot of what's happening in this chart. How we, as ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, is a lot of this restructuring that's going on. How do I and each individual connected to the United States chart, how do they take responsibility? Responsibility is not easy. Saturn is not an easy planet. Saturn is the taskmaster. Saturn says, you of your own free will took responsibility for this child, this pet, whatever it may be. Now, are you going to live up to your Saturnian responsibility? Not an easy thing to do. But look at the Pluto return of the chart. It's Pluto in Capricorn, responsibility. We've all heard those horrible stories of, let's say someone has a gun, for instance. Now that's power. It depends on how that power is used. And then the little kid gets a hold of a weapon and tragedy potentially happens. I'm not giving an opinion here about to have guns or not. I'm just using that as an example of what Saturn in astrology demonstrates, that we all have this cosmic power. You're literally made of stardust. You have the cosmos in your DNA. And to not be responsible for the power individually in the government in Washington, D.C., which is what this chart has been cast for. Saturn retrograde at home in Aquarius. Saturn in Aquarius is social responsibility. Responsibility for not only ourselves, but the people. And it has that last hard square with Uranus retrograde in Taurus, meaning the whole structure of economics responsibility is a big part of what this solar ingress into the winter equinox is certainly highlighted for us. And one of the things about Venus and the Taurus rising is responsibility for the environment, for the earth, and also responsibility for safety and security. Money and economics, of course, is a power, and we live in that system. And think about what you do and who you are when you feel safe. You know your needs will be met. Money, Taurus. You're safe, you're secure. Also, Taurus ruled by Venus is creativity. You came here to create like your creator and shine your light. But when someone is struggling or seriously fearful of going hungry and not having safety and security, again, what this chart is highlighting is how this debilitation in this chart is highlighting for us, well, what are we going to do about people having a home, having food, feeling safe, feeling secure? What are we going to do to get the power back? Because there's very little dignity or power in this chart. And the most elevated planet, the greater malefic, is Saturn retrograde, saying, where is the social responsibility for the people, individually and for the people? Now, we do have the North Node in Taurus. That happens about once every 18 years to have the North Node in Taurus. And so the North Node in the first house, the North Node, the head of the dragon, we could say, is like following your North Star home, your true north. And when it's in the first house, that is about each individual being healthy within their own body. That's the body, the first house, and staying loyal and strong, moon in Leo. And so it always comes back to the people and staying strong and loyal is a good factor in this chart, meaning positive. The South Node in Scorpio, the tail of the dragon, is in the 7th house of partnerships. As an astrologer, when I hear about divorces and breakups and friendships ending, other people, the 7th house, and clients will try to act like, oh, it's no big deal. And a relationship, 7th house, where you got close, bonded, when that ends, of course, South Node in Scorpio, of course, there's a grieving process. Taurus is true. It's trust. You can count on it like a rock. The fact that the lack of social responsibility, Saturn retrograde in Aquarius up in the 10th house, and the fact, for the most part, where people feel that there's no one they can trust in their personal life, public life, in the country, in society, in the government. The fact that that South Node in the 7th house of others, and people expect to be let down. When somebody lets you down, like a parent, what that parent is showing the child is they're showing the child to let themselves down. That's what they're being taught. Well, I was let down, so now I'll let myself down. The South Node in Scorpio, tail of the dragon, the point of undoing in the 7th house. So getting back our own strength, as this chart is trying so hard to do, it's trying to lift off with the kite and the yod pointing to the moon in Leo, and the social responsibility for everyone, the people. Saturn retrograde in Aquarius, right there up in the 10th in the house of the government. This is the direction that we're trying to get to. The midterm elections, I'll do another separate video and chart on that. That's going to be something else astrologically. And Jupiter, let me just close with Jupiter, the guardian angel, the greater benefic. Jupiter retrograde in Aries in the 12th house. It's the ruler of the 8th house and the 11th house. So the 11th house has to do with charity, benefits, raising money for a good cause. The 8th house is joint finance and inheritance, of course. So that Jupiter retrograde in the 12th house, a lot will be coming out about where the money has been going. And also the greater benefic tying into the 11th house is the more we try to do for others, the more it helps the whole and helps us, so to speak. So this is the autumnal equinox solar ingress into the sign of Libra, ruled by Venus, which is peace and harmony at its best. A lot to think about with this chart, a lot to see. So I just wanted to share this with you. And I will do a midterm election chart because that's happening right smack dab in the middle of this. So this is for Washington, D.C., this ancient technique in astrology to pull up the charts for the beginning of the year, solar ingress into Aries, and now the spring equinox, what's happening over the next 3 months. Also, again, you can pull up this chart, cast this chart wherever you live, whatever city you're in. But for us, I just wanted to cast a chart for Washington, D.C. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you all in the stars. Thank you.